Well, good afternoon and happy Tuesday to you, Scott Baker.
Mikey, I'm excited here on September 30th to be talking about our topic, which is how long should it take to reach consensus? And what was the thing you said in our team Slack about what is today?
Well, no, we had just mentioned that the subject of our field note happened to overlap quite a bit with Seth Godin's email today.
Email today,
And
right?
so I was trying to make a joke by
A
saying
joke by saying, yeah,
today is National Consensus Day. So,
yeah,
of course,
which is
we would both write about it, right?
yes. And then of course we were like, no, it's not. And so we were instantly disagreeing about whether it was National Consensus Day. But for all of the days that that everybody there's like I think there's like a national Pop-Tart, a national toaster pastry day, right?
Yes.
I'm guessing, right? So we have all of these things. There, you would think there might be a national consensus day, but that probably they couldn't decide, right?
I don't know where the official list is kept. I don't know if there's a government office in Washington that actually keeps that calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Because, aside from understanding that it is a marketing tactic that a lot of people use, I don't know where the official list might reside, but that I'll do that research. That sounds
Well,
fun.
yeah. So, but we all know then, and we see this in the sort of dysfunction of the planet, and all sort of layers of dysfunction that happen. That I don't know if you've noticed, but not everybody can agree on everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you could find a way to not necessarily get everybody to agree, but to have some consensus, and we have talked in the past about the levels of consensus.
Yes.
So this one is just a sliver of what we won't be able to cover all of what goes into consensus. But on this singular topic of how long should it take to reach a consensus, whether it's the family deciding on where are we going to go on vacation, where are we going to go for dinner on Friday night, right? That could actually be pretty, intense. What channel should we have the television on if people do argue over that anymore? Or actually, what channel? Which app are we going to stream at this particular moment, right?
Yeah.
Now, not to mention what happens in major organizations like ours. So I'm opening it up. Where would you like to start on this discussion?
My guess is that this whole discussion starts back in the 40s for us as Americans. Like in Western culture, the idea of like, how has this changed in organizational operations is probably that us coming out of World War I and World War II and transferring that into like what was the industrial age at the beginning of World War II, there was a lot of top-down hierarchical decision-making status, so that all decisions were made at the top and kind of flowed down from there. So the idea of an authoritarian, which like might not have been as bad of a word then as what it sounds like now, right? But the idea that there's a single decision that emanates from one person at the top of the organization, and then that decision is kind of passed down. And maybe you will, get a little bit of weigh-in from your underlings at the VP level, but really the buck stops here, and I'm the one who's making the decision. And it really operates in the same way that we kind of thought of like military structure. The general makes the decision, it's passed down, and whether you work in logistics or are an infantryman, you're just paying attention to those marching orders as they're passed down to you. And these days, it doesn't work that way, right? So historically, something has shifted. And as we've kind of decoupled our organization's structure with the way that we thought in a militaristic way, then how is it that we best make decisions? How is it that we gain buy-in, right? Because I don't have to support the decision, right? I'm an American who can kind of make his own choice. I know I'm not going to get fired over this, and I actually don't think it's the best decision. And so this notion of like, just because you've made a great decision doesn't mean anything if you don't get the buy-in all the way down the chain of people who are going to implement this decision for you. Then things have changed. So over the last, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, there's been this emergence of says consensus is more important in the way that you make decision. Getting very early buy-in is really very important in that. And so that creates this other issue. The one that we
Well,
didn't have during the authoritarian regime.
yeah, right. Well, and what's interesting is it doesn't mean that the role of the leader is less important. It's actually in some ways more significant because the leader is creating the conditions for this. And I just think that, like many things, there's a greater degree of sophistication that goes into it. And even kind of coming out of your point about the era coming out of World War I, World War II, the Navy SEALs have even over recent years, I've heard the phrase that consensus, where possible, command where necessary. And so that's a bit of that idea. It's not quoted in this field note, but that's a bit of what is in this field note. So there's an element here, and we'll hit a couple of them and then unpack them, which is the first thing that you would notice as you kind of deal with this is that consensus is great. Like, we all want to have sort of a feeling that we're on the same team, we're working in the same direction, we got a kind of a ballpark of where we're going, even if we disagree on some finer points. But that in the middle of that, it takes time. Like, it does take more time to build consensus than it does to just say, here's the order, right?
Right.
And with that, there's also a sense that decision speed is sometimes a predictor, particularly in turbulent times. And that you can actually see that if you're adding specific sort of speed parameters, and we're going to get to the issue of deadlines, that can actually cause some false urgencies in all of this. So if we were to agree that building consensus takes time, then you have to say, well, then what makes it worth the time? And what are the ingredients that go into that? And I think the first one that's interesting in the field note is this idea of goodwill, right? You actually have to have goodwill among the participants, that there's going to be some way of getting to consensus. And to me, we don't really have a whole lot of time in this field note or even in this discussion to break all of that out. But that seems to me to be a little bit tricky. You can't just snap your fingers and make goodwill, the thing for everybody.
No, it reminds me of my kids wanted to play punch buggy so bad when they were growing up. This game
I have no idea what that is.
When you see a Volkswagen Beetle, the first person to see it gets to punch somebody else in the car and scream the color, right? And
color?
That's how you do it. You see an orange Volkswagen Beetle and you scream orange, and then you hit them as hard as you can in the arm or the leg. Punch buggy. It's a classic game. I'm sorry, I don't know why in Western Pennsylvania you wouldn't know what this game is.
I've been all over the world, and I have had kids across 3 decades.
I can't believe you don't know what punch buggy is. That's crazy to me.
I'm a little concerned.
I want Andrew to come on camera right now and say,
you're the only one that knows
this.
A witness, right? And you were in some sort of abusive cult. I don't know. Andrew,
I also do know what punch buggy is, and I am very surprised that Scott does not.
There you go. Okay, so the reason that I bring it up is this: I did not think that my kids could handle getting hit by each other without flailing into
real violence ensuing. Yeah,
and so I needed to know that the both of them, as my 2 older children when they were like 7 and 8 years old, had each other's goodwill in their mind, even as they were given permission to punch each other in this game of this very organized, limited game of what punch buggy was, right? And it had been years. Can we play punch? But they would see a Volkswagen Beetle and they feel like they would have a real loss because their friends at school, they could hit each other, but we can't hit each other in this car. And I remember the very first day that I allowed them to be, I remember where we were. I was in Greenville, South Carolina. We were in a mall parking lot, and I said, okay, we can play punch buggy. And the very first thing that happened was Tucker threw a punch at Wyatt, and it glanced off of his shoulder and hit him directly in the chin, right? So he was like, Wyatt was floored. I was like, what in the world was that? Tucker wasn't the best puncher as it was. But, and then immediately the crying is like, so we immediately had to outlaw punch buggy once again because they just couldn't control themselves. But my estimation of whether or not they could play or not at all was based on whether or not they would have goodwill, whether or not they could punch each other and stay friends, right? Because that's really the key here. So when you're managing conflict in an organization, it very much, without the parental nature of it, is the same thing. can you handle this disagreement without it turning into a turf war?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Sure.
Because that's the main thing that a leader wants to avoid, is this notion of like, it feels like we don't have any direction. It feels like we're not all on the same page. I'm getting frustrated with the fact that we can't just all come to an agreement. And therefore, I'm just going to step in and be authoritarian here. So, and that's the leader's main temptation, is to be like, you guys can't handle it. So I'm going to come in and just tell you all what we're going to think together. Kind of natural.
Okay. Very good example. I've learned a lot. By the way, I rarely deviate here, but I did send a text to my wife, who's from a slightly younger generation than I am, and said, have you ever heard of this? And she said, no.
Really?
So yes. So anyway, just take that. Now let's
you also
then go
married into a very weird family. So
or peaceful people who are kind to one another. I mean, that's a possibility. Now I will say, I apparently, when my younger brother was born and first came over to the hospital, the first thing I did was I punched him in the face. And I was asked then by my mother why I did that, and that I was interested in seeing whether he would cry. The answer is yes, if you do that to an infant. I don't recall this like as a vivid memory myself, and my mother does listen to Lead Better, so she'll be able to kind of correct any errors.
You didn't put the results of your scientific experiment in your application for more grant money?
Yes, right. Yes, that we have proven this.
Yeah.
So let's go then to the other side. So we've talked about the necessary part of goodwill. One of the next pieces of this, you could have goodwill, but if you've got people who are resistors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those who are like, okay, I know the wisdom of the group, but whatever reason, I don't like it. I'm smarter than these people, particularly if you have more than one. This can also hold it all hostage. And I am sure you have seen this numerous times. It just happens. And so for leaders, this is a real problem.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of ways that people do, in fact, all kinds of reasons that people would slow play.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of natural incentive for no change to take place. And if you've got those people who basically have veto power, like you inadvertently give people veto power if you say you're going to operate by consensus. And if consensus for you is defined as everyone is in complete agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you put yourself in an odd position for the people who just have these incentives to not change anything at all in your organization, to just do nothing. And then nothing does happen, right? And so it's hard for people not to stay self-centered and self-motivated by the idea of just kind of putting sand into the gears of change.
Right. Now, we've come to about the 13-minute mark in a 15-minute discussion without actually having the solution, which is the point of my even saying that we usually try to end around the 15-minute mark,
right?
Is that every decision should have some kind of clock. And so part of this solution is for the leader to say, we're going to work through this. We're going to have dialogue. But by this time, we're going to have a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is not a decision, then the leader makes the decision,
right?
Or the person who's in charge of that decision.
So we wrote in previous field notes about the difference between a one-way decision and a two-way decision.
Mm-hmm.
A one-way decision being
recently,
it's hard to come back from it, right? Because it's the kind of decision that has big implications. So when this clock should be set, if we're saying we have to make this decision, we're discussing it, we've already been through brainstorm, we understand that there's 2 or 3 different options here. Which option do we actually exercise? We're going to say, if we reach next Friday and no decision is going to be made, then I'm just going to go, no consensus has been reached. I'm going to go ahead and make this decision on my own. Why are we choosing next Friday? Is that,
yes,
is next Friday is when it turns from a 2-way decision into a 1-way decision?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe that's the reason that we do it. But even if that isn't the case, like you don't have a specific reason as to what day is going to be your deadline, you need a deadline just for the sake of what we're talking about here. Like you need to get past this idea of consensus making and into actually decision making too.
Well, and within we're balancing different admired leadership decision behavior categories, but even in the decision making, sort of module, we do sometimes talk about not rushing to a decision. Like a lot of people will either just kind of sit in this gray area. We're sometimes waiting well into the process, past when it's comfortable for most people, because usually a bad decision comes from something you don't know yet. Right. So in this idea of setting a deadline, it's not that we don't want to just block out like, well, if we don't know by now, right? That you're always on the hunt for new pieces of insight, and you can reserve the right to get smarter or go into a new decision-making process, but you can say, well, we're still going to move forward at this point. And also there are some cultures where, if you were trying to balance the idea of consensus cultures versus hierarchy cultures, and we talked about the difference of cultures, some of those things where you put a hard deadline in certain countries, certain places, most admired leader behaviors are universal and timeless, but sometimes in the advice category of some of these particulars, those are things to keep in mind. But I do think that as a thumbnail, as a rule, just taking this one and saying, let's open it up, but we're going to decide by this time. Like whether it's the vacation, where we're going for dinner, where we're going to build the new plant, when we're going to roll out the new product line. If you have that target, that generally makes things better.
Yeah. And it seems like a weird example, but the choice of where we're going to dinner in a family of 6 when you want to have consensus is an important example, because if you get past 7 o'clock and bedtime is at 7:30 for the youngest in the family,
and you're getting pizza delivered.
Yeah, right. You don't have the choice anymore. And at that point, one of the adults stepping in and making an adult decision that makes sense for everybody instead of letting the 9-year-old weigh in. Like it doesn't work as an analogy, but it does work as an example. Right?
And if you do that badly, y'all end up in Abilene and nobody wanted to go there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sounds good. Thanks,
right.
Mikey.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much. And Andrew, thanks for chiming in and proving me right. The best way to chime in.
Or being part
Anytime.
of the conspiracy.
All right. Bye now.